Uh, my name is Alan Hawkins. I'm director of the School of Family Life, and we're helping to support this event today. And it's my pleasure to just provide a brief introduction to you to Dr. David Blankenhorn. Actually, David and I were having dinner last night, and we couldn't quite pinpoint the first time that we met. We had a few guesses at it, but I first became familiar with David when he was turning what was at that time an academic interest in fathers. It was a kind of a new academic interest that emerged in the social sciences, social and behavioral sciences. And there, again, some academic interest, but David was trying to push that into more of a social movement, social awareness movement, and was key in efforts to establish the National Fatherhood Initiative, which to this day still continues, I think, as the premier organization, promoting connections between fathers and children and kind of leading a social movement. In the process of that, David just kept getting sucked into all sorts of other issues that were going, including a burgeoning or at least an emerging marriage movement, and made some very important contributions to the public discourse on what's the importance of marriage in our society, particularly in a society in which our understandings of marriage were changing. And he was also very involved in that social movement as well, and was pulled into debates on same-sex marriage. And as a result of all these kinds of things, I think he's had a few experiences around the issue of civil discourse, and has probably had some very personal experiences that way as well. But his latest quixotic cause, I'm sorry if that's, I hope, all right, but is to take on this incredibly serious issue that I know we're all facing, and that is it's very difficult to have civil discourse in our society these days. Students, there are seats up front. Don't be shy. Come on up. I've been fascinated to watch David's efforts over the years, and his efforts at being a truly impactful public scholar and taking on very important issues in our society. So I think you're going to be delighted to hear from David, and we're grateful that you were able to come. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Alan. Well, it's not quixotic. Delighted to be here. Thank you all for coming. Okay, so just to define the term, political polarization. It's when society breaks into groups that are increasingly isolated from one another and increasingly do not like one another, do not trust one another, and do not even believe that they even know one another. So it's the kind of, we're talking about something where you say, not only do I disagree with you about something, but I can't imagine how anyone with an ounce of sense would believe that. Who are these people? Why do they do what they do? Who are they? I don't know so many of them. That's political polarization. And when it goes too far, the main thing we lose is social trust. We lose our trust in one another's fellow citizens. We lose our trust that we kind of have each other's backs, that we could help each other in a pinch. And without social trust, democracy is at risk. In forms of government other than democracies, people cannot trust one another and things are going to be okay. But in a democracy, as James Madison pointed out in the Federalist Papers, he said, in a democracy, we require a higher level of virtue than in any other form of government. We have to care for one another and have some ability to work together as citizens, or else the experiment in ordered liberty is at risk. Now, we are at a dangerous moment in our society. We are walking right up to the precipice where the level of mistrust and rancor and a sense of alienation from the other group out there is so extreme that the final result of this is violence. We saw this in the 1850s in the lead up to the Civil War. We've seen it in other periods of our history. And while we are not there now in the United States, thank God, there are some signs. There are some signs that violence is emerging. If you think about what happened in Charlottesville, if you think about the Republican congressmen that were shot a year or so ago playing baseball, if you think about the physical intimidation of people as they try to eat in restaurants or other things, if you think about coercion of speakers on college campuses and other forms of violence and intimations of violence, I think we're at a danger point in our belief that about half of the country has lost its mind, and that is the other half, and is doing something that is dangerous. And they're probably motivated by bad faith in who are these people? Who are they? Why could they believe such things? And so if you think that our problem is going to be solved if your side wins 50+1% in the next election, I would ask you to reconsider that. Because whichever side wins 50+1% in the next election, of course that's meaningful, but it's not going to be very meaningful as long as this underlying animosity and rancor and shouting rather than talking and assumptions of bad faith and vilification and stereotyping of one another is the dominant paradigm of our public conversation. It's not going to matter in that underlying way, even if your side, whichever side you're on, gets 50+1% in the next election. So, let's go to December of 2016. Right after the 2016 election, Donald Trump has won the election 10 days ago. And what happened to me is I called my friend David Lapp, who lives in South Lebanon, Ohio. I said, David, how you doing? How you feeling today? And he said, well, things are pretty good here. You know, this county went 70% for Trump. And, you know, it's kind of hope and change time for us. He said, how are you doing? I said, well, I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And most people are walking around as if someone just shot them in the stomach with a shotgun. They're numb with depression, bewilderment, anger. Did I mention depression? And it's kind of glum up here on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He said, I understand. What do you think we should do? And Alan, this really was quixotic. We said, let's put 10 people who just voted for Trump and 10 people who just voted for Clinton in a little church basement in South Lebanon, Ohio in 10 days. Can we do that? Yeah, what is the purpose? Not sure yet, but let's just see if we can talk to one another rather than at or about one another. And we bring in a guy, you know him, Alan, Bill Doherty, comes out of family therapy, but he understands how to get people to talk to one another. We brought him in to moderate the thing. And it was one of the most powerful experiences that I've ever had in my life. I think that was true of many of the people who were there. A lot of emotion, a lot of feeling. A couple of people got so upset they walked out, but then they came back in. And we knew we had something, you know. They wanted to keep talking after this, and they still to this day are meeting once a month in what we call a Better Angels Alliance. So we knew we had something, and so we were far-sighted strategists, of course. Didn't want to be quixotic. So we said, well, what are we going to do? And so we said, well, let's have another one. Let's have another one of these things. So we did a few weeks later in Waynesville, Ohio. Same thing happened. They said, this is a changing experience for us to actually talk to people that we were thinking so poorly of. So, being far-sighted strategists and not wanting to be quixotic, we said, well, what should we do next? And we said, well, let's get on a bus and drive around the country and have some more of these things, 20 at a time. So that's what we did. We got on a bus and we drove around the country for a month, and we had 40 of these workshops, sleeping on people's couches, whoever would have us. And it was just, I've just never been a part of anything like it. We found that people on both sides really want this. They want to feel better about their country. They want to feel better about themselves. They don't have that much of an opportunity usually to do that. And if you give them the opportunity, they'll take it. We found this among both conservatives and liberals. People who were county chairs of their Tea Party and people who would, you know, shed blood for Bernie Sanders, they both felt this way. And you know, I don't know, some of you might know some of the brain science of this, but there's somebody you really don't like I really don't like you, and I talk with you and I find out that you're not such a horrible person, it lights up pleasure centers in your brain, and it's pleasurable and you like it and you want more of it. I would like to actually speak with you more, not because I'm told to do so by the civic, you know, people, but I want to. It brings me pleasure. And I feel better about myself, and that's what we're finding in this thing. People think a lot of people are kind of heartsick about the state of the country, about the state of our conversation together. They look on the media, social media, and on television, they're horrified at the example that's being set by the people there. And they feel kind of heartsick about it. And they feel like, what, am I living in the country I thought I was? And yet you give them this opportunity to rebuild, to rediscover one another as citizens, and they feel better about it, and they want to do more of it. That's you know, for me, it's, oh gosh, it's just been, you know, for me, I feel like, see, it's a serious question you raised about, is this quixotic? And to be honest, Alan, I felt like I was just kind of standing on a corner and the wind started blowing, and you don't know kind of where it's going to go, but you just kind of go with where the wind is blowing. You know, the old hymn, not I, but the wind that blows through me. And I honestly felt, and still feel today, that there's just some movement in society that wants something better, and you don't quite know where it's going, but you didn't have to invent it. You didn't have to give people a lecture about it. You didn't have to explain why it was important. People want this. They want some kind of conciliation. They want to find one another again as citizens, notwithstanding whether you do or don't like the president, or you do or don't like whoever the other candidate is. And so from those origins, we become a national organization, Better Angels. It took us 6 months to do the first 40 of these workshops, and I moderated with Bill Doherty. We co-moderated every one of them by ourselves, usually riding around on that bus. Now we can do 20 in a week because we have 300 citizens who've been trained to run the workshops. They're all volunteers. The people who train them are volunteers at this point. We can do 20 a week. We have 300 trained moderators. And we're headed to being able to do 40 a week. And we have 6,500 dues-paying members. We have a high membership fee. It costs you $12. because we want everybody to be able to join. We're gaining members at the rate of about 100 a week. We have a small staff and a small budget. Our volunteer to staff ratio is 1 to 147. So for every paid position on the team, we have 147 people who are unpaid members of the team, who are out there every week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week, doing this work as an act of, I would say, empathetic patriotism. And so let me briefly, and then I want to have discussion with you and answer questions and hear what you have to say about this. But let me briefly mention the 4 qualities of the work that we do. I don't mean to, I'm not trying to brag or say that nobody else does this. I just want to say the 4 principles that we try to uphold in our work that I think are meaningful to us. And they did not come about as a result of us sitting down at the beginning and saying, these are our principles. They came about in an intuitive and iterative process of just getting dirt on our shoes and going out there in the country and seeing what works. So I can promise you that we did not have any skills of planning or foresight or strategic insight or political genius, no more than any other person that you'd meet at the coffee shop. But we did get out there and learn 4 things. Okay, number 1, we work on ourselves first before we start thinking about social institutions. You know, so there's a lot of people who don't want to be quixotic and they want to think about the big picture. They say, oh, we have to change Congress, we have to get the media to change, we have to get, you know, the educational institutions to be different, we have to get these big people who run things to act differently, and that's going to bring us together again. What we said was that first we work on ourselves, citizens to citizen, and we try to rediscover one another as citizens and feel less resentful and angry toward one another. And this can be measured empirically in the Pew Research Organization and the American National Election Studies, and others measure this, and we just ripped off their measurements and we do it ours. And we know that people will walk out of our activities less polarized than when they came in. So we said that's the priority. And if people say, oh, gee, that seems like pretty, how are you going to do that? Because there's 320 million people and you can't do this 20 by 20. We said, we're going to start with us. We're going to start in this way. And I think it was a smart decision. We're about to start figuring out how to engage institutions, because ultimately institutional change is what you're looking for if you want to change the country. But we wanted to start at this grassroots citizen to citizen level and just start at the foundation. Number 2 is what we call the Better Angels rule. We actually made it a rule, which is 50% red, 50% blue every time we open our mouths. Red means conservative, blue means liberal, but we have a definition, but those are the terms we use. This comes with funding. This starts with funding. This goes with board of directors, staff, program leaders, program participants. At every level, 50-50. If it's not 50-50, we don't do it. People say, oh, gee, we'll get to 50-50 later, but we're going to start. Nope, sorry. 50-50 from the beginning. And I think it's the most important decision we made, because if you don't do it that way, the side that's being left behind will not trust it. That's really as simple as that. So the Better Angels rule has been really important for us. On our board of directors, we have people who think that homosexual conduct is a sin, and we have people who are married to someone of the opposite sex. We have people who think that Donald Trump is a great American. We have people who think that Donald Trump is an existential threat to everything that America stands for. We have people that have gotten more than one advanced degree attached to their resume, and we have people whose highest level of education is high school. So we're very, very serious about this. And I think it's the only reason any of this works. So if any of you are thinking about going into this kind of work, that's probably the main thing I could recommend, because otherwise a lot of people won't trust it, and they shouldn't trust it. Third rule, we don't try to change anyone's mind. We don't come to this activity trying to debate people, to try to change their mind. Oh, if you only knew certain facts that I know, you would see that I'm right. We don't do that, and we don't allow people to do that in our workshops. It's about saying what you believe as honestly and clearly as you can, and it's about listening to other people do the same. It is not about a debate over trying to get someone to change their mind. And the magic thing about that is that, A, people like it. They'll come if they don't feel they're going to be just hounded by people who just demand. It's like those crazy Thanksgiving, I don't know if you have this, but it's like those crazy Thanksgiving dinners when you just end up just nothing productive happens. So we don't do that. But the other thing that's magic about it is, of course, people do enlarge their thinking in that experience. I'm just picking on you. If I didn't like you and I don't agree with you about anything, but once I begin to talk to you a little bit and understand that there's some values that we share, I do have an enlarged way of thinking, and probably the same is going to be true for you, and it just happens naturally. So we begin to see a little bit of overlap between our views. But we don't have to ask people to do that. We don't tell them that's what they're signing up to do. It just happens as a way of rediscovering civic friendship. It's beautiful to see. The second thing is, we do not want to be quixotic. We intend to change the country. We could not be more serious about this. And so the fourth principle is find a way to go to scale. There are 320 some million adult Americans, and we have figured, there's some research to show this, that if you can meaningfully engage 1% of an adult population in a society, you can make meaningful social change. 1%. You probably remember, Alan, the studies out of Australia where they did this on public health care. They trained 1% of the people in the country to learn some simple health care issues, and it was amazing. It had a big influence. So that's our goal. That's about 2.4 million American adults, and we could not be more serious about this. So one of the things we're trying to do is figure out how to put some of the experiences online so that instead of engaging thousands of people a year, we can engage millions of people a year. And secondly, we are trying to work out partnerships with other organizations, because you can magnify your impact if you work with others. And thirdly, we are trying to figure out how to engage the world of public policy. And you can imagine that's a difficult one, because we don't agree on anything in Better Angels in terms of substance. The wall, climate, taxes, any of it. So we have to figure out a way to influence structures for depolarization without taking a partisan position on any particular thing. It's easier said than done. And we can talk about this during the questions if you want to. But those are the four. Start with yourself, 50-50 red-blue. Don't go into it trying to change anyone's mind. Don't imagine that you're going to lift them to a higher state of enlightenment or civilization or intelligence. And third, be serious about going to scale so that you can reach 1% of the population. Those are the four. I just want to say one more thing before we have a little bit of time for discussion, which is, I am hopeful. I'm hopeful about this. We've dug ourselves into a big hole. Polarization has been increasing since at least the 1980s. So let's not kid ourselves about the size of the problem. And for you students in the audience, don't kid yourselves about the problem that the adult generation is handing you, because it's a serious one, and you're going to spend a lot of your lives trying to figure this out. So I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, But I'm actually very hopeful because I spend a lot of time now traveling around, meeting people, and there are an awful lot of good people out there. If you spend less time watching TV and less time on screens and more time out there in society, you're going to meet a lot of wonderful people who do care about their neighbors, and they don't want to hate others, and they don't think in these terrible ways that you see every time you do look at your screen. And we have a very strong civil society tradition in America. It goes back to what Tocqueville described in the 1830s, and it's a wonderful tradition. We can be very, very proud of it, and the country is strong at the roots, and I think we will that will come to our advantage. As I talk to students, and you might think I'm just trying to, old man trying to flatter young people, but honestly, I do feel encouraged when I talk to students and people who are younger, because I think I don't know quite why, but I think they feel that there's a real problem here that they don't want to be a part of. And I see it a lot, and it's encouraging to me. We have a very strong Better Angels, well, I won't say very strong, but an emerging Better Angels student movement on campuses. We have Better Angels groups on a number of campuses, and one of our priorities this next year is to spread it to many other campuses. We also have an emerging high school program, and I feel also the same way when I talk to high school students. It's great, and it's not just me wanting to be around younger people. I really do think that there's an energy and a vision that that's going to help us climb our way out of this and have it be better in the future. I was downstairs. I particularly enjoyed my time on this campus. I've been here before, and I admire you all. And I was downstairs, and here's the sign, this little sign that says it's spiritually strengthening, intellectual enlarging, character building, lifelong learning, and service. So I like that, because ultimately the challenge here, the challenge of depolarization is ultimately, I think, a moral and spiritual challenge, because there has to be a reason why we would want to treat other people decently. There has to be some reason why we would have an inner desire to do good to our opponent. To me, that's the essence of civility, not just appropriate manners for the occasion, but an inner desire to do good to one's opponent. And that is not something that is that's something that one of my favorite thinkers, Václav Havel, he said, that's a value that comes from elsewhere. That's the way he put it. That's a value that comes from somewhere else, other than just looking at the tea leaves of social facts in front of us. There's ultimately an intellectual and moral and spiritual dimension to this quest that we have, that I think we have. I think we have the capacity for it, and that's why I'm optimistic, notwithstanding the fact that the occasion is piled high with difficulty, and the challenge is great, and the forces of polarization are very, they're in the saddle today. But I do feel that there's. I just think we in the large sense. I don't mean we one organization, but we, the people who want to do this. I think we're going to change the country. I really do. So with that, I think we have about 15 minutes or so for you to ask questions or to make comments. Yes, sir, in the back.
How do you engage independents? Because I don't really identify necessarily as Republican or Democrat. On Utah, I feel I'm liberal, and everywhere else in the country I feel conservative. So is it kind of which way you lean, or is that, or are you involved in different ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. The definition of red for us is you lean conservative philosophically and tend to support Republicans over Democrats. The definition of blue is you lean liberal philosophically and tend to support Democrats over Republicans. Research shows that at least 95% of Americans are in one of those two categories. For the very small number that are not, and you may be one of them, we have other roles in Better Angels that we would ask you to play. To moderate the workshops. There are plenty of things people can do. But for the purposes of the workshops, and that we stick with red and blue. And people always say, I'm not either one, but no, that's probably not true if you take the question seriously. And if you're not, there are other ways to serve. Yes, sir.
Have you had positive media attention as it relates to your projects across the country and in communities?
We have had unbelievable media attention, both nationally and internationally. I've never seen anything like it, far more than we deserve. I think it's because we're about the only group they can find that's actually bringing people together at the grassroots level. But New York Times, Washington Post, ABC News Nightline, Washington Post, Financial Times, hundreds of local newspapers around the country, many, many international newspapers. I mean, it's just, I've never seen anything like it. Not more than we deserve, and it may trickle out since we're no longer kind of the new kid on the block, but yes, amazing media coverage. Yes, ma'am.
So I study identity politics, specifically between Israeli and Palestinian. And something that I've seen in a lot of studies is that like one interaction between Israelis and Palestinians is enough to like humanize for a while, but then after a certain amount of time it kind of wears off. And you mentioned that with that one group, that like initial test group, they continue to meet. Is that like a consistent theme throughout a lot of these like conventions and trainings that you do, that these people get repeated exposures, or is it just kind of like a one-time thing?
Yeah, the research shows exactly what you said. After the initial dose, it'll wear off unless there's a continuation. So yeah, we call them Better Angels Alliances. We view the workshop as the beginning, not the culmination of the experience. They meet once a month. They're and they some of them actually work together on issues. And our goal is we have 24 of them now. Our goal is to have them in all 50 states by the end of the year. Yes, sir.
So at one of these workshops, what kind of questions do the moderators ask at the discussion?
That's a good question. Here's one would be if you were talking, let's say you're a blue and you're with your fellow blues and you're talking and the reds are outside listening. One question would be, what are some experiences in your life that have influenced the way you think about politics? It could be your parents, it could be experience. So the idea is not just what are your views, but who are you as a person? Another question would be, why do you think your side's values and policies are good for the country? That would be another example. And then when they question each other, we make a distinction between questions of clarification and gotcha questions. A gotcha question is what you see on television and radio all day, every day, so you know what that is. That's when you smuggle an accusation into the question. So if you're a Trump supporter, I would say, you say you're not a racist. How could you possibly vote for the most racist candidate that ever ran for president? That would be a gotcha question, right? I'm calling him a racist in the guise of asking him a question. So that's not what we do. We try to ask questions of clarification, which are basically, tell me more about why you believe what you believe. So anyway, this is something, there are many answers to your question. We spent many, many hours trying to figure out the questions and the format for the workshops. We have a 7-hour workshop and a 3-hour workshop, and we also have a skills workshop that's just about talking one-on-one with somebody you disagree with. That's a couple of quick examples. Yes, sir.
So with these workshops, how can you actually reach the most polarized people? I mean, you mentioned that there's 7 hours, they're 3 hours, which might deter some people anyway, but then to give up your time to go and actively engage with the other side is something that probably the most polarized people wouldn't want to do. How do you know you're not just getting a really good sample and you're seeing progress within that group that cares about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Scholars call that the selection effect.
Right.
your outcome is influenced by who selects into the process. We do not think that happens with us for several reasons. First of all, we ask them. So we get, people who are very entrenched in their views. I can't tell you how many times people will say, I'll say, oh, would you like to come to one of our workshops? And you will tell me, well, I might like it, but I like to use fact and reason in my thinking, and these other people don't, and so how could I participate? I can't tell you how many people on both sides bring that up. And so what we say is, no, you're exactly who we're looking for. And they come and it works. And we know that we're getting people who are not, the only qualification is you have to be willing to listen. That's the only, and you're right, you do have to give up some of your time. So that tilts it. We tend to get more economically privileged people showing up, and we are working really hard to figure out how to solve that problem. But I think in terms of philosophy, we're getting, if I was an academic looking at that, I would say there's a small selection effect, but I would not say it's a large selection effect. Yes?
What are some of your ideas for expanding this online? You have chat discussions, or maybe inject some moderators into existing chat platforms, conversation platforms?
Yeah, the question was how do we go online with it? We're just beginning to try to figure that out. I would like to see if we could use the technology now. We're experimenting now with Zoom technology to see if we can have the workshops online. I mean, you can put 15 people on a Zoom thing, and you can actually see everybody. You can see body language. You can, it's not the same as being in the same room, but it's in the same ballpark. And then we're also thinking about one-on-one conversations, book discussions. We're trying to figure out the straight training aspects of it, the sort of pedagogical things. Like we have 17 skills that if you learn them, and most of them are common sense, you'll definitely have better conversations with people you don't agree with. So that's more of a teaching thing. So that's easy to go online. We're doing that now. But it's a hard thing because the essence of the kind of DNA that we're looking for is that personal connection. And it's harder to do that online. On the other hand, we'll never scale by having workshops where 20 or 30 people come at a time. I mean, it would just take too many years. So it's a challenge. If any of you are wizards at this, come let me hire you. Yes, ma'am.
How much of an impact do you believe that social media and the news has?
Yeah. How much impact is social media and the old media contributing to polarization? Almost everybody, in fact, I think this is the only thing that everybody agrees with that comes to Better Angels workshops, is that the media has a large role in contributing to the problem. And I think it has a role. I don't think it maybe doesn't have as big a role as people think it does. It's a little bit like blaming the waiter for bringing you the food you ordered. A little bit, in my opinion. You know what I mean? We're consumers of this. We make our choices. In some ways, I think we're getting what we're asking for to some degree. So I think just blaming the media is not quite right. But the rise of the decline of the analog media and the rise of the digital media basically means that anybody can publish anything with no fact checking, no editing, no governing rules of ethics. And I think that has had a bad effect on the country. And I try to look at, through Facebook and Twitter and other ways, I try to be equally kind of look at what's happening on the flow on both sides. And it's shocking how much you see that just obviously isn't true. I mean, it's just obviously not true. And yet it's part of these, it's part of the flow. low. So I think it has a bad effect. We're trying to figure out at Better Angel, we're looking at something called a media code of ethics that would try to reintroduce standards into journalism. Those of you who are younger, I don't know if you've ever even lived in an era where there were journalistic standards, but trust me, there used to be. There used to be fact-checking, editing, equal time, and so forth. And so the trick is with the new Wild West of media that we have now to kind of reintroduce certain standards, and that will be a process that your generation will have to complete, but at least we can start it now. Yes?
You talked before about following the wind on the corner.
Yeah.
And the movement is there in society already. I'm wondering if you can talk about balancing what you see in society with what you're trying to accomplish. Like, how are you shaping and contributing to that movement and where it's going?
I don't think we're doing much by way of contributing to it, because I think it's already there. But I do think we're giving it perhaps a little bit of definition and a little bit of structure by giving people an opportunity to do something that they want to do. Because one of the things that you find when you talk to people is a feeling of despair, a feeling of pessimism, a feeling that what on earth could I possibly do here? I'm just surrounded in a sea of garbage, and what can I do? And I don't even know these other people, and I don't even know if I would want to. So there's a sense of despair, and so all you have to do really is say, well, you don't have to be depressed. You don't have to be passive. You don't have to stop reading newspapers and watching TV. There's actually something you can do personally that will help you feel better and help the country. And so I don't think we're contributing. We're certainly not, it's not like that. The wind is there, but we're just kind of giving it a little bit of a little bit of structure and definition and maybe a vocabulary. I think we have time for one or two more if there's anybody else wants to add anything. Yes, sir.
Are there any regional nuances you're noticing, how people are responding in different regions of the country?
Sure. People, there are big regional differences. Trying to think of one or two easy ones. Well, there's a period of time where you would question, well, the first thing we do, the first part of our workshop is what we call beyond stereotypes. So each group meets separately and they come up with the stereotypes that they think the other side has about them. They list about 10 and then they choose what they think are the top 5. And so an example of a red group, an example of a blue group doing that, what do conservatives think about them? Wants the government to solve all problems, wants everybody to get things they don't have to work for, thinks with their heart, not their head, and doesn't mind killing babies. That would be. Then the Reds would say, okay, what do blues think of us? We're racists, we're homophobes, we don't like outsiders, and we support avarice as a social ethic. Those would be typical, and we're gun nuts. That would be another one. But it differs a little bit region by region. In the South, the abortion issue comes up much more strongly than in other regions. And there are some parts of the country where people are a little more reluctant to just lay into each other, you know what I mean? There's kind of this nice ethic in some places. I suspect Utah is one of them, I'm not sure. I really do. No, tell me if I'm wrong, but I suspect, look, people have their disagreements and so on, but well, maybe I'm wrong, but there are some parts of the country where people are just not going to attack each other with quite as much gusto. There's that, something on the surface. But yeah, there's some differences. The main one, I think, is in the South, where the influence of evangelical Christianity is just so strong that you're going to get a lot of things on the life issue a lot. And you're going to get a lot of things on religious liberty and a lot of things on just the evil effects of secularism coming from reds. And from blues, you're going to get this sense of, you know, the people who are in charge down here are basically racists.
We need to probably close.
Thank you all.
Please, thank you.
Appreciate it.